Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Steven here with Team Euphoric, and this is day 18 of the 80 Days to Your Dream Body course. Today's protein source is going to be beef liver, and today is going to be a legs and abs training routine. And right now, I'm going to be going over the strength training anatomy and explaining which muscles are involved during each of the leg and ab training exercises. Now let's get started. And now it is time for the main portion of the resistance training workout. And for the first exercise, we want to pick a squat pattern exercise. For myself, I'm going to be doing a high heel elevated barbell front squat, also known as a cyclist barbell front squat. And with regard to my foot positioning, I'm going to be maintaining a narrow heel stance with the toes pointed out. So we're going to be getting a lot more recruitment of the vastus medialis this way. Now, let's get into the strength training anatomy and explain which muscles are going to be involved when we are performing a high heel elevated barbell front squat. At the trunk, we are doing thoracic and lumbar extension. So lumbar extension, you should know this, that's primarily going to be the Erector Spinae group from lateral to medial. We have the iliocostalis, the longissimus, and the spinalis. And then we also are going to be training the multifidus, the quadratus lumborum, and the interspinalis. These are very important spinal stabilizer muscles. So if you have somebody that has low back pain, or if you yourself have low back pain, you shouldn't avoid squatting. You want to learn how to squat properly. That way you can strengthen and reinforce all of those muscles. Then, what are we doing at the hips? Well, at the hips, we are doing hip extension. Whenever we do hip extension, that's primarily going to be the gluteus maximus muscle. That's our main hip extensor. We're also going to be training 3 out of the 4 hamstrings muscles. We've got the semimembranosus, the semitendinosus, and the long head of the biceps femoris, because that's the only one that crosses the hip. The short head only crosses the knee. Then at the knee, we are doing knee extension. Knee extension, I already mentioned this, but that's going to be the quadriceps group. We've got the vastus medialis, the vastus intermedius, the vastus lateralis, and the rectus femoris. And because of the narrow heels with the toes pointing out, we're really going to be hammering home the vastus medialis, and more specifically, the vastus medialis obliquus. So this exercise, terrific if you have any type of knee pain. Definitely give it a try. Then moving down to the knee, down at the ankle, what exactly is going on at the ankle? Well, we are doing ankle plantar flexion. When we are doing ankle plantar flexion, that's primarily going to be the gastrocnemius, the soleus, the plantaris, the tibialis posterior, the flexor hallucis longus, the flexor digitorum longus, and the peroneus longus and brevis. And while we were resting, let's discuss the second exercise. For the second exercise, we want to pick a bending or a hip hinging pattern. For myself, I'm going to be doing a dual dumbbell Romanian dumbbell deadlift. Now, let's get into the strength training anatomy and explain which muscles are going to be involved when performing the dual dumbbell Romanian deadlift. With regard to this exercise, we are doing first at the lumbar spine, lumbar extension. When we are doing a lumbar extension, that is primarily going to be the Erector Spinae group. So once again, from lateral to medial, we have the iliocostalis, the longissimus, and the spinalis muscles. And then we're also going to be training the multifidus, the quadratus lumborum, and the interspinalis. Once again, these are very, very important spinal stabilizer muscles. So if you have any type of low back pain, you would not want to avoid deadlifting. Rather, you would want to learn how to deadlift properly. That way we can strengthen and reinforce all of those terrific muscles. Then, moving distally from the lumbar spine down to the hip, at the hip, we are doing hip extension. Hip extension, you guys should know this as well. Your main hip extensor, that's going to be your gluteus maximus muscle. Then 3 out of the 4 hamstring muscles are also responsible for hip extension. We have the semimembranosus, the semitendinosus, and the long head of the biceps femoris. Only the long head, because the short head only crosses the knee and is responsible for knee flexion. Then we're also going to be training the posterior fibers of the adductor magnus, as well as getting some assistance from the posterior fibers of both the gluteus medius and minimus. Then moving distally from the hip down to the knee. At the knee, even though we are maintaining a static position, we are isometrically going to be training the knee flexors. The knee flexors, that is primarily going to be the hamstrings group. We're going to be hitting all 4 heads, the semimembranosus, tendinosus, and both the long and short head of the biceps femoris. We're also going to be hitting the gracilis, the sartorius, the gastrocnemius, because the gastrocnemius, aside from being a plantar flexor, it also crosses the knee posteriorly, which means it's going to be responsible for knee flexion. We're also going to be hitting the popliteus as well as the plantaris. The plantaris, with regard to knee flexion, this is going to be a very, very weak knee flexor. It's more of an assistance muscle, but we are still going to be using that muscle. And then moving distally over at the ankle, same as with the knee. We are not actively going into plantar flexion, really. It's more of an isometric contraction. So for the ankle plantar flexors, that's primarily going to be the gastrocnemius, the soleus, the plantaris, the tibialis posterior, the flexor hallucis longus, the flexor digitorum longus, and the peroneus longus and brevis. And while we were resting, let's discuss the third exercise. For the third exercise, we want to pick something that is going to emphasize the abdominals. For the abdominals, I'm going to be doing a low pulley cable pull-in, so the same exercise I did on the last ab workout. And for me, I just really love this exercise. For you guys, you can change it up every single week, but the low pulley cable pull-in really is terrific. With regard to this exercise right over here, the way that I'm going to be performing it is I'm going to be placing a towel underneath the lumbar spine. By placing a towel underneath the lumbar spine, I'm going to be able to get more lumbar extension. And by starting out the motion with more lumbar extension, I'm going to be able to create more myofascial tension on the abdominal cavity. And that's going to allow for greater muscle recruitment when performing the exercise. If you have some type of back issue that is aggravated by extension, then I would avoid putting a towel underneath your back. Just do it regularly on flat surface. With regard to the exercise itself, let's get into the strength training anatomy and explain which muscles are going to be involved when we are performing the low pulley cable pull-in. At the trunk, we already did a lot of trunk extension, so now we want to focus on trunk flexion. So for this exercise, we are focusing on trunk flexion, and the trunk flexors, that's going to primarily be the rectus abdominis, the external oblique, the internal oblique, and the psoas major is going to assist in trunk flexion as well. And then moving distally from the trunk down to the hip, at the hip, we are doing hip flexion. Hip flexion, that is primarily going to be the iliopsoas, so your psoas major and your iliacus. It's also going to be the rectus femoris, the sartorius, the tensor fasciae lati muscle, pectineus, the adductor longus, and the adductor brevis. That was just a tiny taste of what can be found in my members only section. If you enjoyed it, become a member for only $5 a month to get access to hundreds of member only videos.